The evening air in Bandar Seri Begawan was warm and still. The river reflected the golden lights of the Sultan Omar Ali Saifuddin Mosque, casting a shimmering glow across the water. Hafiz stood in his small flat not far from the city center, staring into the mirror. The face that looked back at him was one he had known for 28 years, yet something about it felt distant. His jawline was the same, his eyes were the same dark brown, but the light within them seemed dimmed. He lifted his hand, brushing his hair back, and tried to summon the smile he used to wear so easily. It appeared, but it felt hollow, like an actor rehearsing lines for a role he no longer believed in. Once, Hafiz had been a dreamer. He wrote poems in Malay, sat by the riverside with a notebook, and let his thoughts flow like the tide. He remembered nights when he stayed awake until dawn, creating verses that spoke of hope, love, and freedom. But that was before the long hours at the oil company, before deadlines became more important than dreams, before every decision was measured by salary slips and promotions. He leaned closer to the mirror, his breath fogging the glass. And in a whisper that only the walls could hear, he asked himself, "When did I become someone I do not recognize?" The silence that followed was heavier than words. Hafiz turned away, stepping to the window. Outside, the city glowed with progress, but inside him, there was only a growing emptiness. The following weekend, Hafiz walked along the banks of the Brunei River. The water moved slowly, carrying small fishing boats and the reflection of Kampong Air, the village on stilts that stretched across the river. He remembered when he was a teenager, sitting in the same spot with his father, listening to stories of their ancestors who once lived in those wooden houses. Back then, the river was a place of inspiration, a companion to his poetry. Now it was silent. The notebook he once carried was long forgotten, buried under years of unread documents in a drawer. He sat on a stone bench, staring at the dark water, hoping that perhaps a line of poetry might return to him. But his mind was empty. Children ran past him, laughing, their voices echoing across the river. Hafiz watched them disappear into the narrow walkways of Kampong Air. Something inside him longed for that simplicity, the pure joy of being alive without fear of failure or judgment. As the call to prayer rose from a nearby mosque, Hafiz closed his eyes. The sound was gentle, but it reminded him of how far he had drifted from his own soul. He opened his eyes again, and for a moment, he thought he saw his younger self across the river, sitting with a notebook, writing with passion. But when he blinked, the vision was gone. Back at work, Hafiz buried himself in endless meetings. Charts, numbers, and polished presentations filled his days. His colleagues praised him for his discipline, for his ability to deliver under pressure. Yet each compliment felt like a chain tightening around his chest. This was not the life he had dreamed of. At night, when the city grew quiet, Hafiz would sit alone in his apartment, staring at unfinished drafts on his laptop. Words that once poured effortlessly now felt heavy, refusing to form sentences. He typed, deleted, and typed again, but nothing carried the spark of the past. His ambition, once noble, now felt like a shadow that followed him everywhere. The more he chased success, the more he lost sight of who he truly was. One night, he found an old piece of paper hidden inside a book. It was a poem he had written years ago, about freedom and the courage to follow one's heart. Reading it again made his chest ache. He barely recognized the handwriting, as though it belonged to another man entirely. The question haunted him still. When did he become someone unrecognizable? Hafiz attended a company dinner at a hotel overlooking the sea. The room was filled with laughter, fine clothes, and the clinking of glasses. Everyone seemed alive, yet Hafiz felt invisible, as though he did not belong. A colleague placed a hand on his shoulder and said with admiration, "You are an inspiration, Hafiz. You have everything one could hope for." He smiled politely, but his eyes betrayed him. On the surface, he was successful. Inside, he was lost. Later that evening, he caught sight of himself in a large decorative mirror near the entrance. His suit was sharp, his tie perfectly knotted, but his eyes, they were the eyes of a stranger. He stood frozen, staring, until another guest brushed past him, breaking the spell. He turned away quickly, ashamed of how much the reflection unsettled him. That night, as he drove home through the quiet streets, he wondered if he could ever return to the man he once was. One rainy afternoon, while searching through an old drawer, Hafiz's fingers touched a worn leather notebook. Dust covered its surface, but the moment he opened it, the scent of old paper rushed back, carrying memories with it. Inside were fragments of poems, unfinished verses, and scribbled thoughts from years ago. Some pages were stained with coffee, others with hurried ink. He read line after line, his chest tightening. The words spoke of hope, of faith, of the beauty of the river, the sky, and the people he loved. They were raw, imperfect, but alive. Hafiz sat on the floor for hours, flipping through the pages. He could hear his younger self in every sentence, reminding him of who he used to be. For the first time in years, he picked up a pen. His hand trembled as he tried to write. The ink bled into the page, shaky at first, but then steadier. The words were not perfect, but they were his. And for a brief moment, he felt a spark return. The next day, Hafiz walked through the old market near Gadang. The air was filled with the smell of grilled sauté and the sound of vendors calling out to customers. It was a place he had not visited in years. As he passed through the narrow aisles, he saw a familiar stall selling books of Malay poetry. The vendor, an elderly man with kind eyes, recognized him at once. "You used to come here often," the man said softly. "You love to read these poems." Hafiz smiled faintly, embarrassed that the man remembered. He picked up a thin volume and opened it. The words inside were like whispers from another world, reminding him of evenings when he would recite verses to the river. He bought the book and tucked it under his arm. On the way home, he kept glancing at it, as though it were a key to something hidden deep inside him. That night, he read until his eyes grew heavy. The poems stirred something in him, a longing that he could no longer ignore. Sleep did not come easily. Hafiz tossed in his bed, the words from the poems circling his mind. In the stillness of night, he heard a voice inside him. It was not loud, but it was clear. "Return to the river." He sat up, heart racing. It sounded like his own voice, yet younger, braver. The words echoed again and again. Without fully understanding why, Hafiz dressed and walked into the quiet streets. The city was silent, the air cool against his skin. He crossed a small bridge and made his way to the riverbank. The water shimmered under the moonlight. Standing there, Hafiz felt a strange calmness, as if the river itself recognized him. He closed his eyes and listened. And then, almost without thinking, he began to recite an old poem aloud. His voice was unsteady, but the rhythm returned slowly, like a long, lost friend. When he finished, the silence felt different. It was no longer empty. It was full. Days turned into weeks, and Hafiz began writing again in secret. He carried the notebook with him, hiding it beneath reports and documents. During lunch breaks or late nights, he filled its pages with thoughts, emotions, and verses. Yet the more he wrote, the heavier the truth became. He realized how far he had drifted from the life he wanted. The career that once seemed like success now felt like a prison. One evening, his manager praised him for his dedication, promising a promotion soon. Everyone clapped, but Hafiz felt his chest tighten. The applause sounded hollow. He excused himself and stepped outside, into the humid night air. His hands shook as he clutched the notebook. Was he brave enough to admit the truth? That he did not want this life, that he longed for something different? The weight of that truth pressed on him, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it demanded action. A storm rolled over the city, rain lashing against windows and streets flooding with rushing water. Hafiz sat by the window, watching the storm as his mind churned. He thought of the years he had given to a life that was never truly his. He thought of the poems left unwritten, the dreams abandoned, the voice inside him that he had silenced for too long. The thunder roared, and Hafiz felt the storm within him grow stronger. He picked up the notebook and wrote furiously, pouring out everything he had hidden for years. The words came like rain, unstoppable, raw, and honest. Tears mixed with ink as he confessed to the page what he could not say aloud. When he finally stopped, the storm outside was still raging. But inside, Hafiz felt lighter, as though the weight he had carried for so long was finally breaking apart. The morning after the storm, the city was washed clean. The air was fresh, the streets glistening under the sun. Hafiz stepped outside with a notebook in his hand, walking towards the river once more. He sat by the water, opening the pages he had filled the night before. The words were imperfect, messy, but they were his truth. For the first time in years, he felt alive. He realized that the man he had become was not his true self, but a reflection shaped by fear and expectation. Now, with the river before him and the notebook in his lap, Hafiz knew he had a choice. The reflection in the water no longer felt like a stranger. It felt like the beginning of someone he was ready to know again. And as the call to prayer echoed across the city, Hafiz smiled, not with pretense, but with peace.